weeks.
12 weeks of ranting, 12 weeks of living free, all that kind of stuff. It will be kind of funny to see because obviously everything's been pretty focused on one thing and one thing alone for a while during this whole time, and so I'm almost wondering if people are if we're kind of pigeonholed a little bit but after the circumstance change, it might be pretty interesting. And hey, for anyone who hasn't listened to now, hi, guess what? 12 episodes in of Live Free and Rant. That's Chris Maisman over this way. I always get my directions mixed up. I'm Joel Valenzuela. We're here to rant at you. And the topic of this thing might be a little bit of a mystery to some people, of going Rogan. Like, obviously, it's a play on words of going rogue, but there's a little... Joe Rogan is kind of a synonymous person with podcasting. Anyone who does a podcast knows who he is. Everyone kind of, whether or not they admit it, they kind of look up to and aspire to create something like the Joe Rogan Experience. One of the largest media outlets on the world, which is just one guy and a few producers just kind of doing his thing. And there was an interesting tidbit of news where he essentially signed an exclusivity deal with Spotify. Basically, he puts his podcasts on Apple Podcasts, on all kinds of different things, and of course on YouTube as well, which is, from what I hear, it's like the number 2 source of his views. And he's been doing this for decades. It was the number 1 podcast out there pretty much consistently. And then he essentially is leaving all these platforms and going exclusive to Spotify. Now, why in the middle of all this? Why this seems to be kind of like out of left field, because he's sort of been doing things his way for a very long time, and then all of a sudden this new huge deal kind of comes out of nowhere, and a lot of people kind of saw it as oh, good for him, he's finally successful kind of a thing, and as opposed to like what else is going on possibly. Now, there are some reports that had something to do with ye old C word, censorship. So basically, Rogan wanted to interview doctors and experts who have differing opinions on the coronavirus to the officially sanctioned narrative, and was told by YouTube that they would not allow such content on their platform. Oh no. And for people who don't watch the Joe Rogan podcast, which, you don't have to. It's fine. I like it. I watched some of it. But one of his big things is he likes to talk to people from other angles, especially when there's a bunch of controversy. And so, for example, one of these things, he's a huge meat eater. He loves meat. He's a hunter. He's just all into basically the carnivore diet. He's not quite entirely, but he's very ketogenic focused. And he's basically, I wouldn't say anti-vegan, but he doesn't like the vegan diet very much. But he's had vegans on before to debate issues like, was eating meat good or bad for you? Is the vegan diet good or bad for you? He's had people on for 3.5-hour podcasts on both sides. It's kind of what he does. And so he had, at the very beginning of this whole coronavirus nonsense, he had on some people who were explaining why this virus is horrible and deadly, and why we're all going to die, all that kind of stuff. And then since then, of course, he wants to do the other side. Now he seems to have flipped in favor of the whole reopening thing. And it's especially funny because he's been talking about wanting to move to somewhere like Texas, leave Los Angeles forever, if they don't open up the comedy clubs, which is where he makes his money, right? As part of one of his jobs as a stand-up comedian. If they don't reopen and let him kind of work within a month or so. So this is the exact same thing where he can't do his podcast the way he wants either because of this whole censorship thing. So he's just says, YouTube, you're gone. I'm going rogue. I'm going off to Spotify. And haha, you can't touch me.
Yeah, which is, great. YouTube we've been talking about their censorship for weeks, and how dare you have different opinion on, quote unquote settled science, right? Is that what they call it? The science is settled, right? On everything, climate change, coronavirus. If a doctor says it, it's absolutely settled. It must be true, except for the fact that the science changes like literally every day. At first, it was, coronavirus is on all these surfaces and it can live up to 3 days. And if you go outside, you're going to die. And now it's, the coronavirus doesn't actually live on surfaces, or it does live on these surfaces, but it's incredibly hard to pass on the virus via a surface. Masks at first were completely useless. Like, don't use masks. There's no reason to walk around wearing a mask. The U.S. Surgeon General said it. Dr. Fauci said it. And then, weeks later, it's like, now we're 10 weeks into this pandemic and we're going to have mandatory masks in all these different places. Massachusetts has them. Nashua, New Hampshire now has it with $1,000 penalty if you don't wear one, up to $1,000. And then, of course, now everybody's, oh, well, masks. You have to wear a mask. If you don't wear a mask, you just want people to die. And so, I mean, there's so many different perspectives on a wide variety of issues. And science is literally never settled. It's kind of the very nature of science. We're always learning. Science works. You form a hypothesis, and then you test your hypothesis. You do an analysis. You find out did it prove your hypothesis or disprove it? Maybe your hypothesis was bad, and then you form a new hypothesis and you start all over again. That's the nature of science. Nothing is ever settled. So it's like, YouTube having this just overarching censorship. If you have a differing opinion on the science, or if you whatever, right? If you don't trust it for whatever reason, because it's always changing, and the government, of course, always lies to us, then they're going to censor that, and so they're controlling the narrative in such a way that it's so good for Joe Rogan going to Spotify. And the interesting part of it is I heard a rumor that he has like an Alex Jones clause in his contract.
Yes, and that's so far still a rumor, but so Joe Rogan's one of those people he's the most high profile and the most normal person to have some kind of a close relationship with Alex Jones, who's also known as the guy who makes those crazy memes about eating people. And without Alex Jones, my life would be nowhere near as rich as it is today. But he's known to be a professional conspiracy theorist, more or less. And if you have not watched any of the Joe Rogan episodes with Alex Jones on, you're missing out, because they're the best on a few different levels. First off, they're wildly entertaining because Alex Jones is completely out of his mind. And rather than just ranting where he's out of his mind and we're all kind of sitting back watching, having him do that in an environment with other people who aren't as out of their mind is pretty funny to see, like, that contrast. Like, what did you just say? But also, when you hear him at a more long form kind of a thing, he's a very theatrical person, and he just "I'm gonna eat my neighbors" and all this kind of stuff. When you actually stop him for a second and say, like, wait, so you mean this, you mean that, he's a much more reasonable person than you'd ever imagine. Much more intelligent, well educated, reasonable person who also he is crazy as anything, that's for sure, and he's probably wrong on a lot of stuff, but he also has admitted when he's been wrong before. Oh, I gotta let this get out of hand. I'm sorry, I was wrong on this thing. Anyway, but basically that's like his one, in my opinion, from watching the show and stuff. It's that one anchor he has to the crazy world, to the rebel world, because sitting there in LA with a whole bunch of other probably left-leaning, not too educated on issues, stand-up comedians, and then MMA stars, and then scientists public scientists, like, tend to be probably like left-leaning because the community tends to be that way, and those who aren't don't get that much traction, don't get that much acclaim, so they're less visible. So it's like that one kind of connection to the other world, to the balance. And so there's rumor that he has this Alex Jones kind of clause in that he can basically have Alex Jones on and report what he wants. Now, I did record a video which was for another channel, for my crypto-based channel, Digital Cash Network. That's, you got to pay a few cents to watch. It was part of some little promotion kind of thing. But basically, I was talking about how the Spotify deal might not be a good thing in the long term, because right now he's publishing on a bunch of different networks. And if you reduce that to a single network, that network basically kind of owns you to a certain extent. And even if you say, oh, I'll just take my audience elsewhere. Well, if all your audience is subscribed on Spotify and all your listeners and all your money, you can't, even if you get out of the contract and go rogue, and you can't just like replicate it right away. It doesn't transfer like that. You have to still go out on your channels. Hey guys, remember me, subscribe here. Hey, I got to get new advertising deals now because it was all through Spotify. Hey, I got to piece it all together. And just that one little, like, I mean, like, YouTube made him say, I'm done with this stuff. But YouTube wasn't everything. It was just a strong part of his audience, but it wasn't everything. Now imagine if YouTube was everything, and he would just like have to like lose the whole thing. So it's, on a side note on that, it might not turn out as well as he thinks it is. But the fact that he's willing to go like just ditch probably the largest media platform on the planet because they won't let him say what he wants, it's pretty telling of where people are starting to go. Yeah, and hopefully it leads a more broad-spread, more widespread exodus of YouTube, right? Because they are constantly censoring and constantly taking down content, and if your content goes against their community standards, then they just pull it, and they regulate the narrative in that way. And of course, we post up at library.tv, lbry.tv, which is completely decentralized, completely not censorable, not whatever. The industry term tends to be censorship resistant. There we go. Both because it means you're resistant to censorship, and also because I don't think you can ever be completely free of being censored. It's always theoretically possible in some way. It's just like what they say, water resistant for up to 100 feet. It's not waterproof. It's like you can't have a completely waterproof smartphone that you just dump in the water and then maybe it doesn't ding off a rock in some way. A bowl? Yeah. Right. So censorship resistant, which is great. The industry term decentralized, tends to be censorship resistant. It's more of a reward system for good content than it does, filter out the bad content. You can tip and stuff like that and repost, and it increases the initial value of the original post. So if you head over to library.tv, lbry.tv, and search Live Free and Rant podcast, or search for the Desert Links, and tip our videos, repost our videos, comment on our videos, and help increase our exposure. Yes, and on a little bit of a side note, which is it's kind of funny, a bunch of crypto YouTubers are complaining that they're getting censored from YouTube. Oh, I got demonetized. I didn't do anything to deserve this, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of them have moved over or are syncing their content to both centralized platforms and decentralized alternatives. But I noticed that very few people are leaning into that kind of stuff. And that's one thing I'm doing, right? I think my library channel for crypto stuff is like is probably going to hit 2,000 subscribers today, which for a non-YouTube platform is pretty nice. But my YouTube channel version is like 250 subscribers. It's like nothing. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to be like complaining about censorship. It's one of those things about like risk versus reward in terms of like investment. Like you just say, like for example, what happens if you move to a poor red state as a developer and start building up, start buying a lot of property and building a bunch of nice condos and stuff? You're taking a risk because you're going there where like no one wants to live there. It's the middle of Alabama, no one cares. There's just nothing around there. But if you just see, look, this is a nice spot. I just see this could be gentrified. I could, have a lot of people from like New York and California or whatever who hate their high tax states move there and then subsequently ruin Alabama. But that's a different conversation. But you take that risk and you could get in on the ground level, get in a lot of get a lot of good, very valuable property for very cheap, because you just take the risk that you could just be like the largest slumlord in Alabama and just be broke, and so it's one of those things with decentralized content platforms as well, or just move into something that's pro free speech. Is you could be early, and when you're early, it's like you're the first guy at the party. Have you ever been that kind of guy? You go to a party, you show up early, and it's just like you and this one weird guy who just won't leave you alone or whatever, and you're just like, oh, why'd I leave? Why'd I get here? But then if you get there on time or a more socially acceptable hour, then you could just like not have any tables, or you could it's just completely packed. There's no spot. It's like sometimes it pays to be early. There's a risk versus reward, but sometimes it pays to be early. And so that's all I'm saying about that part of the censorship thing is it pays to be early in securing yourself against this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's a good point. And I have been known to, on occasion, show up to a party early, but usually it's when the person hosting the party I know and like.
Yeah, it's the best.
To minimize that risk.
Time before all the other visitors show up.
He's gone again. We had the chairman of the Massachusetts GOP watching for a second there, and I was just going to give him a shout out because he has been vocal against the restrictions in Massachusetts as far as the stay-at-home orders there. So shout out to Jim Lyons, the chairman of the Mass GOP, for speaking up and speaking out.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where I think there's a giant... Well, here's the thing. I am not a conspiracy theorist, which is always a great way to start a sentence, especially if you're on a first date. I should recommend you to try it out. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. You don't even have to say "but." You just say that, and with an anticipation pause of like, there's more coming after this. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist because I believe a lot of conspiracy theories rely on kind of weird, fantastical, not believable thinking about humans' ability to organize something in crazy complex and all like cooperate together, especially the government. I'm sure they've plotted some nasty stuff behind closed doors, and there have been some actual examples of that. But for the most part, they can't pull off some like massive side. Like that's one reason I don't really believe the whole virus thing is an engineered kind of a thing. Now, on the other hand, I do believe very much in the natural conspiracy, so to speak, which is people act in their best interest. And of course, there's this virus that comes out and it's threatening a lot of people, and by global pandemic standards, it's not really that bad, but it is everywhere, and it does actually kill a lot of people, and some people who aren't even old or infirm. It is a thing, and it's gotten everywhere, and it's caused some damage because of that, and loss of life and other horrible things. But, and I do think that for the most part, governments have in the beginning, government officials, because I don't believe in this Borg hive mind of like global New World Order government nonsense, but government officials have said, oh, we're in our positions of power to do something, and we're going to be looked at by history horribly if we don't do something. So
right. Well, that's how government officials kind of they always react as, if we have to do something, right? Mm-hmm. We have to do something. And, we talked about this at length before. Mm-hmm. At the beginning of this, we didn't really know what the hell the virus was or what it was going to do. There was crazy models that said 2.5 million people were going to die. So most governors and even the president, they were talking about, 15 days to slow the spread or stay at home or flatten the curve. And by and large, most people in this country went along with it. We said, okay, because we don't know what the hell's going on. So we went along with it. And then as more and more data began to roll in and more evidence began to mount that the virus was very particularly dangerous for a certain subset of the demographics in the state or in the country, right? Over 70, you have a much higher risk. Over 80, you have a much, much higher risk. If you're in a confined indoor environment, like a long-term care facility or a nursing home where you already probably have a weakened immune system, you're probably already in the final years of your life, mm-hmm. then it's going to be much more prevalent and dangerous. First of all, because you're in these confined environments. So once it gets in there, it's just going to spread around the whole facility. And second of all, everybody that's getting it in those facilities is already susceptible to have a very negative outcome like death. So, but once we knew that, the government didn't change its tactics. And that's really where things started to go wrong, right? Because once we knew who was at risk and why they were at risk, and pretty much everybody else was, I mean, the CDC dropped their fatality rate for this in the United States to 0.3% today, which is still about 3 times worse than the seasonal flu on a normal year.
Yeah.
But it's not the same demographics. Like the flu kills pretty much up and down the age spectrum, and it does kill more elderly folk because they have more susceptible immune systems, more vulnerable,
and
right?
By the way, I think that most recent statistic kind of gives you a picture of what it is. First off, we don't pay attention to how many people the flu actually kills. It is kind of bad compared to stuff, but it's just the flu. People get the flu, whatever. Flu vaccine doesn't work. Who knows? Whatever. And it's basically like if someone explained this ahead of time, like to the impact of this is, hey, imagine the flu, but very like it spreads to everyone. Like pretty much it's going to be like the new flu, like on top of the old flu, and it's going to be 3 times as deadly. And by the way, you don't realize how deadly the other flu is. I'd be like, oh, that's kind of scary. Well, let's just make sure the hospitals are there. Well, maybe I would even say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to like go out while this is going. I'm not going to go out very much. I'm not going to go in the middle of, a crowded room with a bunch of other people sneezing on me. Like I'll kind of back off a little bit just to make sure, that's the kind of response you kind of get. You get like, oh, this is a problem, but this is not like a global catastrophe. And it's like, as far as the actual carnage caused by this, I don't think they would warrant these kinds of things at all. And more importantly, I don't think these kinds of things work. But then here's where the natural conspiracy kicks in. So first off, petty, stupid politicians say, you got to do something. Otherwise, we'll get hosed. Otherwise, people will hate us. And then that was basically especially with Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire, that's probably what happened with him especially. It was, people around here don't like these kinds of things, but all the cool kids are doing, all the cool governors are doing it around me. They're all shutting stuff down. I don't want to be like that one guy who doesn't, and then I might as well do stuff. And so there's a lot of people that I think did that kind of a thing. And then once they get the power, first off, they can't just be like, all right, we did a thing, we're done, bye. No, they're not going to give it up. They're just going to keep it, but we really this and that, and I think we're doing so much good. And then there's something satisfying on a personal level, which, just because I love freedom doesn't mean I can't see into the mind of people who don't. But there's something satisfying about seeing your own plans take place. So, for example, say you go to, a pub or whatever like that, and you just say, like, I think everyone should wear, like, red T-shirts on a Tuesday. Or just some nonsense. Like, you make that. And then if you see people all start coming in a group of red shirts, and you're like, I did that. See that? I did that. That's pretty cool. And so when people are like, governors are seeing like, people wearing masks around and stuff, and they're like, yeah, look at this is like the product of my power right here. Or they see like the beaches are shut down. It's like, yeah, pandemic. And then look, life is not as normal because like I did this. I'm helping them, even though they're not. It's like, it's very hard to get rid of that. And then especially they start having momentum, and then you start having like, there's the initial things you do. You go, I don't know, shut down restaurants or something. I don't know what I'm doing. And then you start thinking, and by the time it's too late to actually like cause any difference, you're still as a politician thinking like, what should we do? Well, experts say this, and every expert who now, now is their time to shine. Hey, I think that 6 feet is a great distance. What do you think? 6, but if it's an athletic thing because people move around, they sneeze. How about 8 feet? That's a good one. And then they all start coming up with stuff, and then before you know it, it's like now everyone's got to live under it. It's just a self-continuing natural conspiracy kind of a thing. And then what happens if people start saying stuff that threatens that order? Your natural thing is to hold on to control over your own life and your own kingdom. And so, for example, I'm sure that's a thing that a lot of parents struggle with, is they want to tell their kid things that are in their best interests. And as soon as their kid doesn't do it, there's a knee-jerk reaction to want to reestablish order and authority, even if it's not in the best interest of the kid. And the smart, loving parent, of course, has to take a step back and think through, like, what are the consequences of this? What do I do there? But there's always that, like, no, I said no, you did it anyway, therefore, I don't care how ridiculous it was to begin with, I got to reestablish order over my kingdom. And so it's pretty obvious that there's that kind of a thing. And that's why it goes back to, like, the Joe Rogan thing. YouTube has nothing to do with state and local governments or national governments, really. It has nothing to do with governments at all. But YouTube, which started as this crappy, like, Google was just a fantastic search engine. And then YouTube, they had Google Video. I don't know if you remember back in the day, they had Google Video was a big thing. And then YouTube was just some other company that was just allowing anyone to put up video stuff. And that's where the U and tube for TV. It's like, and at some point, YouTube was just kicking Google's ass. And Google's like, we'll just buy YouTube. So they bought that. And then eventually this, like, video site, this, like, people posting, like, random clips of random dumb things and vloggers or whatever else starts to grow to become a huge media platform. And Google becomes this, like, super, like, this basically a global power. And when you get up that part, you're not like, one of the things a lot of people say about Joe Rogan is he is the most regular dude you'll ever meet, especially in context of who he is. As far as, like, this guy inked a $100 million deal with Spotify just for one of his 3 jobs. Like, you realize this. Like, this guy's got 3 jobs. One of them, he's like, I'll make $100 million on this one. And he doesn't work for any company or anything. He's just, he works for the UFC for his commentating job. But, like, his product, he's not, like, under some media conglomerate. And that's the weird thing, is most, like you say, like a Larry King or, like, another person who's a Howard Stern, I think. Again, I'm not super versed on their inward business things, but this guy basically owns all his own stuff. He doesn't work for anyone. There's no media production company that's like he's under that owns a piece. It's all him. And for this guy to just, but he's just a regular, for lack of a better term, it's like a regular jackass who's like has that mentality of just like, I'm just a guy who doesn't know anything. I'm going to have people on, a lot of whom are smarter than me, and just talk about stuff and get high too. And that's why people like it. But that's not what most people do. Most people, when they're faced with this enormity of their life's work, they start to be like, oh, we got like YouTube and Facebook, like Google and Facebook now have a seat at the table. And I hate that term so much, but it's so proud. They got a seat at the table. Now the power players are like, okay, look, little shitty video site. We're faced with a public health crisis that could cause hundreds of millions of people to die. We need your help. And they're like, oh, they need our help. Guys, they need our help. And it's like, how do you not want to participate in being a global power player now that you've reached that stage? And some of them don't even, I would even say, err on the side of, devil's advocate, right? YouTube's advocate. Don't want to be this. They didn't get into the business to be like a part of global governance or whatever, but they feel a responsibility. They're like, oh, well, now that I'm this stage, I got to be part of this because I built something this big. It's my creation. I have to be part of this. I have to like sit down and, testify before Congress and work things out with the power players because I got to this level, and whether or not I like it or not, I'm influencing people on this level. And then you get to, okay, Facebook, why don't you start banning fake news? Because have you ever had a crazy aunt or whatever share a conspiracy theory or some like crazy pro-Trump type meme on Facebook that was just completely just ridiculous and not factual? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, I mean, it happens on both sides of the coin, right? You get a lot of not so much relatives of mine, but I've seen a lot of people on both sides, like they just see this pro-Trump meme and it sounds really great or it owns the libs or it does whatever you want it to do, and they just share the heck out of it and they're all about it. and even when you like point out that it's completely factually incorrect, they're like, oh, and they just kind of move on, right? And they just keep, and same on the other side. Like if it's anti-Trump meme, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's factually correct or not. They just the never Trumpers or the the far left or whatever they are, share the heck out of it and see Orange Man is terrible, blah 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 blah. And with I think it's gotten. I haven't seen it so much lately. Because I tend to just unfollow people that sharecrop like that because I don't have enough brain capacity to deal with arguing with that kind of. I don't care. I can't. I don't have time to care.
It's done.
So if people share either pro-Trump falsehoods or anti-Trump falsehoods, I just kind of unfollow them from my Facebook feed because I don't want to see it anymore. Don't really care. You can't make me care. I have way other better things to do with my time. So I don't see it all that much anymore, but every once in a while I'm like, what, really? You really? Do like a minuscule amount of fact checking before you share something? Of your own. I'm not saying trust the fact checkers either because the fact checkers are just terrible. But
of course. Now the funny thing about Facebook is in my experience, and I've been on Facebook for like few decades. It's been well over a decade, right? It's been, I think it was since like 2000. I don't want to get my dates confused and even say. But
I've been on here for 13 years.
Yeah, so it's been at least that long. I know because I have some 12-year-old things that they're sharing, but it's been on, been on forever, and I've seen like at one point I had like 300 or so friends, and then I was like, I want to start sharing, like I want to start a blog. I'm going to start sharing things. So I friended everyone who seemed relatively pro-liberty. Anyone who had a Ron Paul profile picture, or a million mutual friends with them. So I just got a lot of them. First off, holy crap, are there a bunch of conspiracy theory bots that are like fake people that like work at Global Awakening and all they share is chemtrail videos and stuff like that. And it's just like, I had to like delete so many different people. But Facebook was ground zero for the pro-Trump populist resurgence because, it's a platform that the people can use. Of course, the leftists would share MSNBC or CNN videos and be like, oh, look, or an article, like this is trusted news. They share that kind of thing. But because there wasn't really that other than Fox News, and even then that was kind of watered down. But you could just share a meme or a picture or a video directly in Facebook, and it could just go viral crazy. Like everyone's just share. You have 20 million views on a thing before you know it. And so Facebook became like ground zero for the right-wing uprising. Now, and of course, because of that, you have someone like Mark Zuckerberg, lefty. He's just like, oh, what have I enabled? So now he's like, I'm going to start ratcheting on fake news. And then all of a sudden they start, especially because the people they're at the table with are now, well, we gotta socially distance, we gotta do this, we gotta do that, and they're all in the part of the same conversation. And then they say like, look, where the lockdowns are doing, we gotta stay at home, all this stuff, lockdown stuff. We don't want the people to start thinking this is a hoax, and your site, Mr. Zuckerberg, is full of that kind of stuff. What are you gonna do about it? It's like, I guess I'm going to start tagging things as fake news and doing all that stuff. And then YouTube has their whole like at home with me nonsense channel on, that I keep on like saying, I don't want to see this, and it pops up again. And then of course anything that the World Health Organization does not agree with is just banned from YouTube, because that's where YouTube is another conspiracy theory hotspot, or was in the past, where just everyone's like, oh, I got a YouTube documentary. Like the number of arguments I've been in with morons who just said like they don't they don't cite actual news stuff. They just want to throw me some stupid conspiracy YouTube documentary. I'm like, I'm done. I don't want those anymore. So all these kind of these kind of platforms are now kind of coalescing around the same power. It's just like the same narrative of we got to keep whoever's consensus bad ideas moving forward, and then now everyone's sort of circling the wagons and trying to enforce that against anything. But because of that, now you have big players like Joe Rogan who are not interested in the right versus left debate. They're just interested in talking about the truth. They're not interested in people's power games or people's seats at the table. are just like, nah, I'm out. I'm leaving this thing. And so that's kind of where we're at today, is like the more they tighten their grip, the more people are kind of going to slip through their fingers.
Well, and that's always the way, right? Like I had a lot of friends in like high school, and our parents were all varying degrees of, control, like you want to call it that, or whatever. And the ones that had the least controlling parents tended to be less crazy post like turning 18.
Of course.
Whereas the people with the most controlling parents, like for example, my mom was a little bit of a tyrant. And I kind of went like batshit crazy for like 5 years after I moved out of my house from like 18 to 23. So, I mean, that's like this kind of the same thing. The more that these companies or governments or whatever tighten the fist, the crazier people are going to get in some respects. So, like the more YouTube censors videos that disagree with their stated narrative, the more people are going to believe that there is a conspiracy theory afoot, right? Because how else can you just like the human brain craves rationality,
Of course.
and when something challenges your perception of the world or your worldview in such a degree, it's like, how do you justify that? How do you reason that in your brain? And I mean, most of the time, what's the saying? Never attribute to malice what you can attribute to ignorance, or something like that.
Stupidity.
Is the saying. Or stupidity.
Something
yeah.
like that.
Most of the time it's stupidity, because people are stupid. Like generally, I'm stupid sometimes, You get this preconceived notion in your head, and then everything you see is either confirmation bias or fake news. So it's like, all right, I have this idea in my head, and so I see a news article about it, and it suits my narrative, so it must be true. See, or it doesn't suit my narrative, so it must be fake news, right? And everybody does it to some level at sometimes, right? But to step back and have these critical thinking and be able to look at both sides of an argument, or like Joe Rogan's, right? He has his guest list is impressive. He had like Julian Assange on, he's had Bernie Sanders on, he's had like everybody, right? And I mean, he did endorse Bernie Sanders, but generally he just has these guests on and has a conversation. And I listen to the Ben Shapiro podcast all the time too, even though he's a little bit statist on a lot of things.
He's a little annoying too, but it's fine.
Yeah, but the guy's got a ton of information.
Yeah, he's very smart, and he talks intelligently so fast you just get confused and can't argue with him.
Well, I mean, I enjoy listening to it because I get so much information in the hour that his podcast is, that it's just like, even if I'm not like actually listening, because he does talk incredibly fast, you get a lot of that information. And I don't agree with him on a ton of issues, but he usually represents his argument in a very intelligent way. And I mean, unless he's talking about like bombing brown people in the Middle East, which is like a big thing that he is in favor of, like keep our military over there so that they don't come here kind of argument, where I'm more like bring the troops home because we're not the world's police. So when he talks about that stuff, I just get all mad at my radio and I yell statist and all that stuff. But where was I going with that? But like arguments like that, even if they challenge, but in my opinion, more people need to listen to arguments that do challenge their preconceived notion, right? Because none of us are 100% correct, unless you're the one true libertarian, right?
Yes, that kind of goes into like, you definitely need to expose yourself to different viewpoints, and that's one of the reasons why Joe Rogan was characterized by a lot of people as a right winger, as an alt-right something or other, even though he is
he endorsed Bernie.
He's pretty libertarian left kind of person. I mean, it's funny, he didn't explicitly endorse Bernie. He thought he was a good candidate, or he didn't specifically say he was going to vote for him. And the time before that, he voted for Gary Johnson. And he's definitely not like a libertarian, but and then based on what he's talking, he talks about like he likes the idea of universal basic income. He talks about social safety nets and things like that. But he's extremely, especially, I think his rhetoric changes depending on the situation or the guest. But it sounds like, based on the last week or so, he's extremely pro Second Amendment, and he's extremely anti-censorship and pro free speech, and it puts him in a very kind of unique position. And it's funny hearing all the different people. Sometimes my girlfriend gets annoyed because I'm listening to a Rogan podcast and there's someone saying all kinds of stupid shit. like, oh no, and I'm like, it's okay. I'm just exposing myself to other ideas, and based on that kind of on the breadth of information that's out there, you get to kind of hone your stuff a little bit more. I did enjoy when he had Milo Yiannopoulos on. Which, hey, does anyone remember Milo? That guy used to be a thing.
He kind of fell off the edge of the flat Earth, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He went too close to the There Be Dragons, But he had a very good appearance on Rogan. They agreed on a lot of stuff, but then they had some fun back and forth. I have not seen many back and forths on that show like that recently, but it's still, different points of view. But you do kind of learn something, or at least kind of learn where your boundaries are, as far as that guy's wrong, I'm right. And then you can sometimes learn, oh, I didn't think of it that way, I'm going to change my viewpoint. But even if you don't change your viewpoint, you find out where you actually agree with the other person on. You're like, I agree with them on this and that, and then there's this part that we completely disagreed about before and still completely disagree about, but at least now we know it's just this, and this we all agree on. Which kind of reminds me of our new fans, right? There's this show called Locally Sourced, I believe is the name of it, that is a local New Hampshire show by some artist, filmmaker dude who apparently watched this podcast, which, if you're watching now, say hi, who basically did a episode commenting on one of our last episodes, which I have to say I have not yet been able to watch, but I will be watching it hopefully today and answering. But basically just said, don't agree with you guys on everything, but respect your perspective or whatever like that. And hopefully we'll get to go chat with this guy and see where there's some common ground, because I honestly don't think that anyone who's not a total bot, just like must say this, must say that, like, who's not just locked into a point of view, I don't think that someone like that who is not like that will not have something fun in common or something. Because ultimately, I don't think that, first off, I don't think either of us has any allegiance. I sure don't, or if I do, someone should tell me, so I should leave them. But as far as I do tend to believe in a freer world is always better than not free world. That's like my one general moral compass, is maximum freedom, minimum government. That just tends to work out. As far as what that means, what does a libertarian believe on this, or what about on that? And I'll make that up as I go along, sort of. And as far as what I've heard you say, it's definitely not like a mainline conservative type viewpoint, and it seems to be trending more towards the dark side of the anarchy, with each passing nonsense that happens in the government. But it's like that kind of wild man thing kind of puts us both into a don't have allegiances kind of bucket, and is the one thing that would kind of make us allergic to other people's viewpoints is if their viewpoint is a bucket viewpoint, is that's something I fundamentally reject, that I don't have common ground with someone on, is that there is a one-size-fits-all kind of a narrative that's true, that this conveniently predetermined grouping of facts and viewpoints is just, that's right, and then everything else just isn't inherently.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, like you, I mean, the less government, the better, obviously, because that more people will have the freedom to make the choices that they need to make for their prosperity and for their health and for yada yada yada, for every issue. So obviously, the less government, the better. Now, I do tend to, I mean, I call myself conservatarian. It's a coin term. I didn't coin the term. I copied it from. I think Greg was the first person I heard it from, and I loved it, right? Because I'm more conservative on the government aspect, but more libertarian about, certain issues. So when it comes to like, I mean, so it's conservatarian, libertarian. I mean, we put a capital letter in front of everything. Like I am a Republican. I'm a registered Republican. I generally vote for Republicans. I don't remember the last time I voted for somebody that wasn't a Republican, because I think that's probably libertarians are going to jump down my throat on this one. That's the best path to less government. So I'll wait for my inboxes on that one. But yeah. I have no allegiances to certain politicians or whatever. Like if I agree with you on an issue, I'll agree with you on an issue. I have my token Democrat, who is my Facebook friend, Paul Birch, is a Democrat out in Stratford County, state rep, but he's really good on criminal justice reform and in certain other issues. So and then on other issues we disagree, of course. Mm-hmm. I agree with Trump on a lot of issues, and I disagree with Trump on a lot of issues, and I agree with Kristen.
I think the same could be said for Trump. Trump agrees with Trump on a lot of issues, and he disagrees with Trump on a lot of issues.
It depends on the day. And I agree with, the Governor Sununu on a lot of issues, and I disagree with Governor Sununu on a lot of issues. So, like you said, there's no real allegiance to like a certain person or a certain. Mm-hmm. It's if it's pro liberty in my estimation, right? Like free the weed or end the death penalty, then I will agree with you on those issues, and I will work with pretty much anybody to do good, right?
Of course.
On the converse, on the flip side, like I will work with no one to do bad. So just because we have a GOP governor doing these, like lockdown things, I'm not going to agree with them. Like they're wrong. Like the stay-at-home orders are bad for New Hampshire. They are bad for our economy. They are bad for the people that live here from an economic and public health standpoint. And same with Trump. If Trump wants to do something bad, like, bomb brown people in the Middle East, I'm not going to agree with him. I will disagree with him. But if he wants to abolish the Federal Department of Education, I'm all in. Let's get it done.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, to a certain extent, if you're trying to get anything done cooperatively, you do have to sort of limit your opinions to a certain extent. Like, for example, if you want to eat someplace, and you have your group of friends, you're not going to agree with everyone on everything, but you might have to be like, well, this is my second. Like, we all get to go to our second choice. It's not our first choice because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do it together. There's a kind of thing with cooperative stuff, which is one reason I don't really participate in a lot of cooperative things, because I want to do kind of what I want to do, and that's it, and that's. But so. Now, on the other side, there gets to be, I don't know if you've ever had this experience as well in collective action, where you're out with a group of friends and they all want to watch a movie or something, and no one can agree on what to watch. So the one that everyone ends up watching is the only movie that everyone hates, kind of. But because you all agree on it, you kind of all end up watching that. And it's not even phrased in that way, it just ends up happening. It was like, it is terrible. It's kind of like, if you go out to eat as well, like, oh, I want, this Thai noodle shop, whatever. Oh, no, I want McDonald's over there. And somewhere near there, you all end up at like a Denny's that no one wanted to be at. And it's like, that's Joe Biden. So that's the problem with this overly collaborative kind of, back the blue no matter who kind of idea, is you end up with the absolute worst possible person if you're not willing to say, I will vote for, my guy is Andrew Yang, but Tulsi is a second. And third would be Bernie Sanders or something. Like, so let's say a hypothetical lefty here. And then they're like, well, and other than Bernie, like maybe I'd go for a Warren if that's the worst. But anything worse than that is just, I'm out. I'm not going to participate. And that's a very reasonable kind of point of view that a lot of people, I'm sure, think that way. And that kind of thinking crowds the decision over to someone more reasonable. But the blue no matter who kind of idea is whoever it is, even if you hate them, if they're under this tent, you got to vote for them. And then, of course, that thinking produced a candidate like Biden. If that risk of people not voting for him, which, by the way, is still there, people still aren't going to vote for him. A lot of Democrats are still not going to vote for that guy. But it's perceived that it's not there. if that risk was perceived as greater, you would not have had him as a major candidate to begin with. And I mean, the amount of like nonsense, of course, the sexual assault allegations and just overall creepiness have been a big factor in his campaign, which I think is a very small part of the controversy. In my view, that is nowhere near as big as, can the guy even think and talk straight? Like, this guy's you're trying to give him the nuke button, and he can't even like form a sentence. And one of my favorite things is, and this is he recently was known in one of the most, in the funniest thing I've seen in a while, was he was on a show and he said, essentially to Black America, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. And that's not even paraphrasing. I don't think that. I'm pretty sure that was verbatim.
He said if you're having trouble figuring out if you're for me or for Trump, well then you ain't black.
Yeah, which I don't want to come to Joe Biden's defense for anything. I do basically think he's trying to just say the basically prevailing Democrat narrative that is the party of minority groups, and the Trump people hate all that. Which, I reject that narrative completely. But I think he's just trying to say that. But of course, in his kind of a way, he would just say, I mean, you could even just say, for crying out loud, you could just say, well, if you have trouble figuring out that thing, then you don't really know what's in the best interests of the African American community. Which I still think is kind of an insulting, mean, dumb thing to say. But even that. So he just put his foot in his mouth once more, which is why I have to bring up this fantastic Babylon Bee headline, which Babylon Bee is a parody site. And now they've said, to save time, they'll now be just republish everything Biden says verbatim instead of trying to parody it, because you just cannot parody the nonsense that comes out of his mouth anymore.
Yeah, when truth becomes stranger than fiction, you have to question the timeline, right? The simulation is broken. I mean, this is the guy. I don't even know where to start. He called one of his, I don't know if it was a supporter or not, but it was somebody at one of his town hall meetings, and he said, look, fat, check your facts, fat, or something like that. I mean, he said, he told another Democrat supporter that he was going to have to find a new candidate for some reason. And the guy's just from an, not what I don't know what the word is. Doesn't matter. From an outsider looking in, because I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden. Probably, no, definitely ever. I will never vote for Joe Biden for anything, even if he's. Oh, that's right. He said he was running for the U.S. Senate. He said that he will beat Joe Biden. Joe Biden. He's. I will beat Joe Biden. Okay.
Is he admitting that he beats Joe Biden every night? If you know what I mean.
Hey. So I mean, the guy is just said. It's like, oh man, and I don't know how, like you said, the Democrats ended up with this because it's vote blue no matter who, and they know that the duopoly is, which is what the big L libertarians like to call it. We have a two-party system, and that's just kind of all it is. And even come November, the people that say they're not going to vote for Joe Biden, or they're not going to vote for Trump, or they're not going to vote for Sununu, but they definitely won't vote for Feltus or Valinsky. A vast majority of those people will hold their nose and vote for the lesser of two evils. Mm-hmm. And because they feel it's their civic duty to participate, which I kind of agree with, right? And then there's other people that say, oh, voting is consent and voting is violence. And I mean, that's kind of an extreme, but most people will vote. We'll probably get like 80% turnout of registered voters in New Hampshire in November. And there's not going to be a whole lot of blanks, and there's not going to be a whole lot of write-ins.
Yeah, which that kind of reminds me of another fun thing that happened. And this is, so I generally like libertarian type candidates, just because they tend to promise less evil stuff. But the Libertarian Party, well, is something that I very much agree with in concept. I'm not a fan of the party itself. The way it's shaken out in recent years just seems to be horrifically incompetent for most, in not even principled anymore to a lot of extent. That being said, so they appear to have selected a nominee for this time, which, no one cares, doesn't matter. But, I do think it is amusing. So it's Joe Jorgensen, a lady. I don't know much about her, so I'm just not going to try. But I do know that people sort of hijacked the hashtag I'm with her from the Hillary campaign to talk about Joe Jorgensen. And it became the top trending hashtag on Twitter for a little bit. I believe it was yesterday or the day before. And it was pretty hilarious that
it was hysterical.
Because,
and there's multiple reasons it trended, right? So, I mean, it ended. The convention, the Libertarian convention ended Saturday night at some point. I remember seeing it on my Facebook feed. I have a couple friends that are big L libertarians.
Yeah, and they need
like
hugs
live
constantly, by the way. So
they were live.
nice to them.
They were live Facebooking the whole convention and going play by play, and I kept trolling them. I was like, "Oh, vermin or nothing, vermin or I'm out, vermin or I'm taking my ball home." Because I mean, if you don't know Vermin Supreme, you got to look him up. He is a perennial candidate in New Hampshire, and he wears the upside down boot and free ponies and all that. Yeah. Anyways, so the I'm with her hashtag started trending right after the end of the convention, or shortly thereafter. It ended at like 11:30 maybe, and the first people. So some people were, the Democrats are the ones that got it to trend, right? It wasn't libertarians. I don't think there's enough. I don't think there's enough big L libertarians to make anything trend. The Democrats were mad that they co-opted this hashtag. So it was actually kind of a brilliant marketing ploy from the big L libertarians, because they were like, hashtag I'm with her. We'll just do this to own the libs, right? And the libs bought it hook, line, and sinker. And a ton of them on Twitter were just pissed that, how dare you? That belongs to Hillary Clinton. I'm with her, but you're not her, and all of this. So, I mean, it kind of like, wow, is Hillary going to be the nominee after all?
It's a fantastic exercise in identity politics. Now, if you think about it's a very simple phrase. It's very simple. It's positive. It's group thinky, because it's like we're with someone or other, and it's, if Biden, is there an I'm with him hashtag?
Oh, there totally should be.
Well, no, because it's all hims basically. It's like, it's all dudes. It's like, I'm with who, which guy? But the fact that it just says I'm with her and that's it. Well, which her? Oh, wait, that means because we got a woman candidate and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so it's literally all about that. And it just basically made a identity politics catchy hashtag all around. It's a broad running, and it's like that's it. That's literally it. That's the only thing. Just like Biden is not Trump, Hillary is a woman. That's like the only selling point. And then you have someone else who just jumps on this identity politics thing. Hey, guess what? This is, and, I'm sure it was used humorously, but it's like the same thing of, I'm with her, because now, again, there's only one woman running in a major party. I don't know if you can call the Libertarian Party a major party. Sorry, guys, but close enough, right? There's only one major candidate, one could say, and that is a woman. So I'm with her could only be Joe Jorgensen. And that annoys the what out of people who just thought that they cornered the market of identity politics. But guess what? You could just say whatever you want, and it applies to only one person running, and it's not the Democratic nominee. It cannot apply to that person. And just like the rage of like, we own this idea, we own just any kind of usage of first woman president kind of thing. Is this weird? It's a very weird thing, and it kind of circles back to Joe Biden thinking, to use the Family Guy meme that's been used hundreds of times about the situation, that he's king of the black people. It's just the same thing of like, I own a segment of the population. Like it's not just that, don't think you represent them, we're the only ones fighting for their rights in this way. It's not even like that loose. It's like, it's very like, we are the people that speak for them, period. That's it.
Right.
And that's not our policies. We're, not like what is Joe Jorgensen promoting that has something that is harmful to fellow women, that is not this, that is whatever. No, not about that at all. It's the wrong. Like, we, Team Blue, owns all women and all minorities, and that's just
And if you don't vote for Hillary or Biden, you're voting against your own self-interests. Whether you're black or gay or woman or any other minority, Hispanic, whatever. I'm not going to say all Democrats think like that, because that wouldn't be true and it wouldn't be fair. But that is how the Democratic Party has presented their narrative over the past at least 4 years.
A lot longer than that.
Yes.
Which is funny. Like, I remember people used to say that Bill Clinton was the first black president, which I think, if you haven't heard that, look that up. It's pretty funny. I can't, it goes way too deep into the identity politics. Some people have actually said that Trump is the first black president because of, you know, some of his actions, like some of his like style and stuff, which I think that's a little bit ridiculous. I think it's, everyone knows he's clearly the first orange president. So let's just not get our identities twisted here. But it's just funny, this whole like identity politics thing that has nothing to do with actual policies for these sorts of people. But the main point in all this is not just we are the people who work the hardest for and represent these communities the most. It's this taken for granted kind of like arrogance of we own you. And that's, you know, that's messed up. Like, what if so first off, am I, as a Hispanic person, am I owned by the Democrats? Absolutely not. Am I, as a, one could say, not like elite Harvard educated, or also not blue collar person, like white person, which I am also, I'm white and Hispanic, right? Am I therefore owned by the GOP? No, absolutely not. Like, they got to earn, everyone has to earn my vote. And so far they really have not done a good job of that at all. And just this idea that someone, you just like, we speak for you, or like, oh, you know, don't worry, I'm on team you. It's like, I don't know very much about Jo Jorgensen, but I can tell you for sure, she does not speak for me as a liberty person. She speaks for herself and her ideas, and if I like her ideas enough, I'll vote for her, but she doesn't speak for me. I speak for myself, right. Which is pretty funny because that's always going to be part of the libertarian culture, is no one speaks for me, right? That's kind of part of the thing. But the other parties are, you know, trying to speak for other people, and it just, you know, it's strange.
It is. It's strange. And we all need to start speaking for ourselves and going from there, and, you know, working together on issues we agree with, or working against each other on issues we disagree with. You know, all's fair in love and war and politics. So, you know, if you're, I mean, this, you know, like the legalized pot movement is pretty nonpartisan now. It's come a long way in the past, I don't know, 4-6 years or whatever.
It's nonpartisan in that no party is really behind it.
Right. I mean, the Democrats say they are, but, you know, a good third of them vote against it, and the Republicans say they aren't, but a good third of them vote for it. And, you know, the death penalty is kind of the same way, and criminal justice reform is the same way. And there's a lot of these cross-party issues now, which I think is a good thing, right? Because, and that's kind of the way it should be. And nobody should have like this, I mean, there's certain core issues that the two parties, or the three parties, the two parties,
4 parties. Let's not forget the Greens.
Yeah, the two major parties disagree on, you know, such as you know, taxes. Allegedly, the GOP is against all new taxes, and then you get some Republicans that vote for them anyway. But whatever. And then, you know, the Democrats are for new taxes, and you get some that vote against them anyway. And, you know, education is becoming pretty clear cut along those lines, with a few stragglers on either side, and unions are pretty much clear cut with a few stragglers on either side. But there are a lot of issues that are crossing party lines now that we can all work together to push forward, whether you're R, D, or L. And I just hope to see more of that, to, you know, to promote these ideas that limit government and increase freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that seems like a good note to wrap this whole thing up on. Don't forget, there's the Patreon over there. Throw Chris a few bucks. Subscribe to whatever channel you're watching this on. And probably just subscribe on YouTube, the Desert Links, or Live Free and Rant on YouTube. Do those. So it's not just Facebook Lives. And then Cointree, crypto donations, all that kind of stuff there. That's probably about it. We'll see you next week. Hopefully we'll find another fun video to play out by then, but this time hasn't been there. But yeah, hopefully the world has gone in a new interesting direction we can rant about. Because if not, You'll see a lot of rehashing over the lockdown suck kind of issue, I bet. All right. See you, everyone.